The courthouse smelled of metal and old paper, like something long dead pretending to be alive. The doors behind me clicked shut, sealing the echo of that single sentence that would not stop replaying in my head. "You're trash." "Get out of my court," it wasn't shouted. It was said the way a man closes a file he's already decided not to read. The words fell with a kind of lazy precision, like ashes off a cigarette. I stood there a moment too long, my hands still dusted with flour from the bakery. I'd rushed here straight from the morning batch, bread rising while my case was falling apart. The smell of yeast clung to my coat, warm and human, out of place in that sterile hall lined with glass and resentment. A cough from behind me. Then a laugh, half swallowed. My cousin leaned against the wall, phone raised just enough for a photo he thought I wouldn't notice. "You got what was coming," he whispered as he passed. I didn't answer. My jaw ached from holding back too much. Anger, disbelief, the need to defend myself to people who had already written the ending. When the clerk walked by with her stack of papers, she wouldn't meet my eyes. Not even pity, just efficiency. I wanted to say something. To the judge, to the room, to anyone who might still be listening. But my throat closed around the words. "Are you sure you want to say that?" I'd asked him just before he delivered the line. "You heard me," he said, not even looking up. Case dismissed, and that was it. The gavel never needed to fall. The humiliation was soundless, final, and already spreading like ink through every part of me that still believed in fairness. I was 53 the year the judge called me trash. Old enough to have built something honest, young enough to still be punished for believing honesty mattered. My days began before dawn, in the dim hum of my bakery on Maple Street, the air thick with the smell of yeast, the steady rumble of the oven like a heartbeat I could trust more than most people. Bread doesn't lie. It either rises or it doesn't. That's how I built my life. Every morning, I'd dust the counter with flour, tie my apron tight, and listen for the slow breath of the radiator in the corner, a sound that reminded me I wasn't alone, even in silence. Sometimes my grandson Ben would sit on the flour sacks by the window while I worked. He's 7, all elbows and questions. I taught him how to tie his laces between batches. He said it felt like braiding a secret. I told him that's what life is, just knots we learn to make and unmake. My family never saw it that way. To them, success was measured in square footage and last names engraved on brass plaques. My cousins wear watches that could buy a year of my rent. My sister Diane does the talking at every funeral, always the first to cry, never the last to take. She's good with numbers, but worse with truth. We don't fight anymore. We just trade silences. Ours is a family fluent in quiet disdain. Only one person still crosses the line between their world and mine, Carla, my oldest friend. She shows up before sunrise with coffee in a paper cup. No questions asked. My mother taught me to knead bread by feeling it. Not by measuring how much you can take, I told her once, brushing flour off my hands. She smiled. Then don't let them weigh you by their scale, the words stayed. Longer than most kindness does. I used to think dignity meant being invisible, working hard, staying polite, letting the noise pass. But lately, I've started to wonder if invisibility was just the first stage of erasure. And that thought... It's harder to swallow than any stale loaf I've ever baked. It came folded between the day's bills, thin, cream-colored, and heavy, in a way paper shouldn't be. I noticed the family crest first, faintly embossed in gold, the old ivy-wrapped shield my uncle used to stamp on every Christmas card. There was no return address, just my name typed cleanly in serif letters. Like someone wanted the message to look official but feel personal. I wiped my hands on my apron, leaving faint white prints across the envelope. For a long minute, I didn't open it. Something about it, the weight, the timing, felt deliberate. The bakery still smelled of rising dough and scorched sugar. Outside, rain tapped against the window like impatient fingers. When I finally tore it open, the scent of pipe smoke drifted out, ghostly, unmistakable. Inside was a single sheet of paper creased twice. One line in the center, to be opened only after the funeral. I laughed before I knew I was doing it. The sound startled even me, short, sharp, disbelieving. My uncle had been dead for 3 days. By noon, Diane showed up, pretending it was a surprise visit. Her eyes went straight to the counter where the envelope sat. Where'd that come from? The mail, I said. Yesterday, she pressed her lips together. Best not to get your hopes up. You know how he was. I know, I said, folding the letter again. That's why I'm going. Word must have traveled, because later that afternoon, my cousin dropped by under the pretense of buying bread. He leaned across the counter, voice syrupy. You're actually going? I'm going to see what the man who raised me left for me, if anything, I said. I owe him that much. He smiled too quickly. Then I guess I'll see you there. The air smelled of burnt crust and deceit. The bus to my old neighborhood had a cracked window that rattled like a loose tooth. Rain blurred the city into soft watercolor, as if the day wanted to hide the places we keep secrets. I sat with my hands cupped around a paper cup of coffee, feeling the heat soak through and thinking of the envelope folded in my breast pocket. It felt heavier than paper should. The neighborhood smelled of wet asphalt and something older, the tang of coal smoke and the faint sweetness of corner bakeries that still burned wood. My uncle's building stood 3 blocks from where I learned to knead, a narrow brick thing with a stoop that remembered our shoes. His door opened on a thin hallway where light fell in slats and dust slept in corners. The suit was still in the wardrobe, pressed and patient, cedar scent faint like a memory someone had tried to preserve. Funny, isn't it? I asked the apartment as if it might answer. The record player on the table made a tired scratch when I nudged it. A jazz trumpet cracked the air like someone clearing their throat. I met Mr. Alfaro at his shoe bench. He'd mended everyone from our block, souls, hearts, reputations. He had fingers like knotted twine and eyes that had seen other people's truths. He was a quiet one, Mr. Alfaro said, running a needle through leather. Never wanted praise. Used to teach the neighborhood kids to read on his stoop. He tapped the bench. Taught you too, didn't he? More like watched me, I said. Kept the books, fixed the radios. He shrugged. People like him hoard different things. Like what? I asked, leaning closer. Like the things you can't hide in plain sight. He looked up, smoke curling from his cigarette like a question. Why hide it? Because truth is dangerous where people prefer stories, he said, and the words landed like a verdict. Diane met me at the lawyer's office that afternoon with a practiced expression. Her suit was linen and impeccable. Her voice was the voice she used at funerals, soft enough to call pity into the room. We should keep this formal, she said. There are legalities. The executor, my cousin Mark, sat with his hands folded, thumbs carving tiny rhythms into his palm. He smiled the kind of smile that measures paperbacks. We'll publish the will tomorrow, he said. Everything will be transparent. Can I see the documents now? I asked. He blinked like someone considering a child's request. Not yet. The reading is formal. You know how these things go. You mean you know how you want them to go, I said. My voice didn't surprise me. It sounded small and steady at the same time. Mark's smile didn't break. We're all tired. Grief complicates judgment. Later, alone in the apartment after everyone left, I pulled the wardrobe open. The cedar smelled like a closed book. Among the suits, I found a prayer book with a faded spine. Tucked into it, in a handwriting I recognized without wanting to, was an account number and a note. For those who will read beyond the first page. The paper trembled in my hands. I took a stack of other papers, utility bills, postcards from Capri and Lisbon that seemed ridiculous next to the grocery lists. Receipts for donations to small charities, odd sums paid under different names. The edges of the papers were brittle with age, the ink smudged where a thumb had lingered. There was a codicil folded inside an envelope marked with the crest, the same as the one I'd received, sealed in wax. My throat tightened. Night had come by then. I sat at the kitchen table with a lamp that hummed and pushed the papers into a small, trembling pile. I read until my eyes blurred. The codicil mentioned trusts, conditions, and testaments that sounded more like promises than legal instruments. There were names I did not recognize and notes with single words: humility, care, service. Beneath them, a small ledger lay as if waiting to be read. The ledger's handwriting was precise. Each entry a short confession. Paid to shelter, $2,000. Paid to Mrs. Rivera for school, $500. Seed money, $10,000. The numbers added up in ways that made nothing look accidental. I left the apartment with the ledger wrapped in a brown paper bag and the codicil folded against my chest. The city at night had a different voice. Sirens, the distant clack of a train, a dog barking like someone's heart. At the bank, the teller had a nervous tick at the corner of her mouth. She looked at me the way someone measures whether to risk a favor. "We can't release account information without authorization," she said. "I'm not asking to see accounts," I said. Does the safety deposit box at branch 14 have key number 317? She hesitated, thumb tracing a line on her desk. When she leaned forward, she dropped a small brass key into my palm under the pretense of clearing the counter. "Safe deposit, only with proper authorization," she said, but her eyes were different. "Tell no one I gave this to you." "Why?" I asked. She shrugged. "Because sometimes the bank keeps things too tight. And sometimes people need a little help to find what someone left behind." The key was warm and heavy, like the weight of a name. In the dark of my car, I turned it over and over until the edges bit into my thumb. It was the kind of small theft that felt like the right thing. Driving back, I thought about the ledger entries, the codicil's single-word conditions, the way Mark's hands had trembled near the legal folder. I thought about my own hands, calloused, honest, used to measuring dough by feel. The ledger felt like an accusation and a map, both at once. When I set the key on the dashboard, the rain slowed to a fine mist. I pictured the bank vault, cold metal and the hush of paper, and I knew the next step would mean opening locked things, literal and otherwise. My heart bumped against my ribs, loud enough to be heard over the hum of the street. The vault smelled like iron and time. When the metal door swung open, the air that breathed out was cool and dry, carrying the faint lemon oil scent I'd come to associate with my uncle's desk. Inside, boxes lined the walls, each labeled in his small, exact hand. Some bore names I expected. Others were anonymous, labeled with words like communities, seeds, scholarships. The ledger fit into the last shelf like a folded sermon. I sat at the long table under the single overhead light and began to read. The estate plan was not a single dramatic document, but a choreography of conditions. Trusts named not only heirs but tasks. 3 months of verified volunteer work. A letter of apology delivered in person and notarized. Proof of consistent caregiving for an elder for at least 1 year. The sums attached to each clause were staggering. $500,000 here, $3 million there, adding up to a total that made me swallow hard. 47 million. The number sat on the page like a stone. A letter followed, the ink slightly smeared where a thumb had pressed on it as though to steady trembling hands. The handwriting was the uncle's, small, deliberate, the kind of script that never wasted space. If you read this, you will know I meant to teach more than give. Money without test teaches the taking of things. I choose to give where dignity returns to its owners. If you want my fortune, show what your mouth could not when my back was turned. I read the line aloud, because it felt wrong to let those words stay inside me. My voice sounded different in the vault, hollow and a little reverent. "He taught me resilience," I heard myself read, and even as the words left my mouth I felt their double edge. "He taught others how to take." Diane's breath was close behind me before I heard her. She'd come like a shadow, the linen suit somehow softer under the vault's light. Her shoulders hunched in a way that used to mean exhaustion, not guilt. "You wanted him to be kind," she said, voice tight enough to snap. "He chose to be honest instead." "You always wanted what the papers say you own," I said. I could feel the bread dough in my hands as if I'd never left the oven. This is something else." She stared at the ledger, as if it might rearrange itself into the version of truth she preferred. "Why make tests?" "It's cruel, not cruel," I said. "Necessary," the word surprised me. Necessary like rinsing flour from your hands before you touch the dough again. Necessary like the hard sunlight that kills molds. The ledger contained more than sums. It was a map of intent, payments to shelters in neighborhoods no one in our family visited, contributions to clinics in towns we'd driven past and pretended not to see. There were entries with dates that did not fit any pattern a family eager to show gain would expect. $10,000, Mrs. Gonzalez, 2012, for rent arrears. $20,500 harmonica lessons for community center kids. The handwriting beside them read like small confessions, paid quietly because pride costs more. A stack of envelopes fell from one box when I nudged it. Inside, letters from people whose names I'd never heard. Teachers, pastors, a woman who ran a shelter and wrote, "He left me enough to keep the lights on through winter."
I cried, and then I wrote his name on my ledger.
Her letter smelled faintly of detergent and sunlight. "You see now?" Diane said softer. He wasn't spiteful, he was teaching. Teaching to whom? I asked sharply. The people who already had everything? Or the people he knew were made small by silence? She looked at me like I'd asked her to read a language she'd never learned. He wanted to restore dignity, she admitted finally, like a gift and a wound at once. I traced the margins of the ledger with my thumb. The ink had bled slightly where someone's hand had rested. It felt intimate, like a confession written in the dark. Somewhere in the entries I found my uncle's notes about people he'd watched over. Farah keeps the bakery open through blizzards. Calls her grandson before daylight. Small hands, large work. I laughed then, a half sob that tasted of relief and salt. My name in his pen, not as an afterthought but as a careful notation. "Did you know?" Diane asked, voice brittle. "Did you ever—" "No," I said. "I never knew. He kept his own counsel like an old man with good teeth." "Then why send you that envelope?" she asked. "Why single you out?" "Maybe because I showed up when bread burned," I said. "Maybe because I kept my hands in flour when they cleaned their watches." I let a beat stretch. Or maybe he wanted someone who had been invisible to know he saw them. We sat in the vault while the building hummed around us. Two people balancing the weight of inheritance and the strange relief of being understood at last. Outside, someone bolted a door. Inside, envelopes snapped closed with a small decisive sound. "You could take it all," Diane said suddenly. Her eyes weren't accusatory. They were pleading. "You could fix everything." "I could," I said. The ledger felt heavy in my lap. "Or I could follow what he asked. It's not about what I want. What would he want?" She whispered. "Humility," I said. "Proof of care. A letter saying what we were ashamed to say before." I thought of my cousin Mark, of his tremulous hands and polished shoes. I thought of the people in the letters who had warmed a winter night because he'd paid the bill anonymously. What if they failed the tests? Diane asked. "Then they fail," I said. The word had a sound like a gavel now, not cruel, but precise. He didn't leave a prize for the loudest mourner. My throat tightened, not with triumph, but with a sorrow that tasted like burned sugar. Vindication sat beside regret. I wanted to reach for both at once, and instead set the ledger carefully on the table, like a book that needed to be handled with clean hands. Outside the vault, footsteps approached. The reading of the will would start soon, and with it, the family's theater of grief and claiming. I folded the codicil into my pocket, feeling its edge like a compass point. "He left a map," Diane said, almost to herself. "Then we'll follow it," I said. "Or we won't. Either way, the truth is waiting." I stood, and the ledger made no sound as I slid it back into place. The lemon oil scent lingered on my fingers, a small, honest reminder that someone had kept accounts for more than money, accounts for human worth. The meeting room smelled of lemon oil and cheap coffee, an odd marriage of my uncle's desk and the courthouse lobby. A long table ran down the center. Family members clustered like birds on a wire, some poised to peck, some ready to fly. Mark sat at the head with the will spread before him like a map he'd studied until the edges softened. He tapped the paper with a manicured finger. "We'll proceed with the formal reading," the lawyer announced, voice measured. "All parties present." "Before you read a single line," I said, standing with the codicil folded in my hand. "I have something the room should see." A rustle ran through them. Diane's face went white in a way that wasn't grief. Mark's smile froze, then thinned. "You're not authorized," Mark began. "I am a beneficiary," I said. "And I'm also the person who found a ledger and a codicil in his apartment. I'm also the person who's been carrying his letter in my pocket for 2 days. I unfolded the paper and set it on the table. The room leaned toward it like a tide. Mark's jaw worked. "You're making theatrics. This should be handled privately." "Privately?" I looked at him. "You handled the funeral privately. You handled the files privately. You handled our grief privately, and then expected public applause. My voice stayed clinical, measured like the oven timer at 3 a.m. You don't understand the responsibilities. Mark snapped. I think I do, I said. Responsibility isn't what you call it when you hide things that don't flatter you. Diane reached for the codicil as if to smooth it, fingers trembling. We followed his wishes, she said. We prepared what he specified. You prepared what suited you, I said. Where are the distributions to the shelter? The entries to Mrs. Gonzalez? The donations to the clinics? The ledger I read lists them. The accounts exist. I set the ledger on the table and opened it to a page where a faded receipt lay pressed between the leaves. Is that... Mark started, then went quiet when I plucked the receipt free and held it up. The signature at the bottom matched Mark's, the same flourish he'd worn to calls and check endorsements. That's a receipt for a wire transfer dated February 12th, I said. To, what's this bank? I read the line, and the signature, your signature. Mark's fingers tightened into a fist. I signed some documents on his behalf. Without authorization, I said. Forged in the name of convenience. You used his name to move money that was meant for care. My words landed like a series of small, precise knocks on a door. Voices rose, overlapping, jagged. That's an accusation, my cousin Lana cried. You can't just... He had powers of attorney, Diane protested. He had dementia at the end. Someone hissed from the corner. Carla stepped forward, coffee cup in hand, eyes fierce. We all have receipts, she said. She put a folded envelope on the ledger. I used to be his friend. He paid my rent one winter when my husband left. He asked me to keep it quiet. I kept it quiet. Last year, Mark offered me hush money to sign a statement about his capacity. She stopped, the sentence cracking. Carla? Diane's voice was small. I took the envelope, Carla said, breathing fast. I signed. I regretted it. I'm sorry. Her apology hung raw and immediate. That's bribery, Mark spat. Extortion, or truth, I said. Either way, it's evidence. The lawyer looked at his watch, then at us. If there are claims of forgery or bribery, that's a matter for the court. I thought you liked courts, Mark said, bitter. You just stood in one. I could feel the temperature in the room shift to something sharp. Chairs scraped. A spoon fell and clinked like a small bell. Diane's hands covered her face. Why? She whispered. Why would he do this? Why these tests? He wanted to teach, I said. The words surprised me because they felt like forgiveness and a verdict at once. He wanted to give where dignity would be restored, not where it would be flaunted. He didn't want his name on a building. He wanted people's lives to change. You think you can read a ledger and judge people? Mark spat. You think you're better than us because you need bread? No, I said. I think I'm someone who kept my hands honest. I think that matters where money is concerned. My voice didn't rise. It held, resolute. An old friend, Tom Reyes, who had once worked with my uncle at the hardware store, stood. He'd been quiet until then. There's paperwork, he said. I've seen Mark sign things. I thought he was helping. He looked at Mark as though he'd just discovered a portrait of someone he didn't know. When he offered me a check to say things were fine, I took it. I'm ashamed. The room's air tasted like metal and lemon oil. Details were unspooling, small confessions stacked like cards. The lawyer's hand hovered over his briefcase. Take the ledger to the court, he said finally. We'll submit it as evidence. If there's forgery, we'll have to involve the authorities. Mark's face crumpled in a way that was almost adolescent, rage exposed as fear. You think opening this will change anything? He asked me, voice breaking on the last word. It's not about changing what was, I said. It's about refusing to lie for the sake of comfort. He trusted we could be better. There was a pause the size of a held breath. Then quietly, Mark said, I thought I was protecting the family's reputation. You thought you were restoring us, Diane finished for him, voice small. Instead, you were erasing us. Mark's eyes filled. It wasn't theatrical. It was the look of a child who had been told he was the heir to a kingdom, and then realized the kingdom was a ledger full of names he did not understand. I didn't know what else to do, he whispered. That's always been the problem, Carla said. You didn't know what else to do, so you did this. The lawyer reached for his phone. We'll need to file a petition to suspend the executor if there's credible evidence of misappropriation, he said. And forensic accounting will be required, a cousin barked. You're ruining the family! Like a challenge. Someone else sobbed. Plates clinked as hands shook. The afternoon sun hit the table and threw a line of light that looked like a knife. I didn't come here to watch you all tear each other apart, I said. I came because he left instructions to restore dignity, not to let it be sold back to the highest bidder. I pushed the ledger toward the lawyer. Do what you must. Diane took my hand then, squeezing once, an action that felt like a bridge being built over something raw. If he wanted care given, then it will be given, she said, voice steadier. If he wanted apologies, they'll be asked for. Mark's shoulders shook. I'm sorry, he said, to us, to the ledger, to the room. I thought I was saving something. You saved your comfort, I said. Now we save what he actually meant, the lawyer stood. I'll file the petition. We'll request an audit and temporary guardianship over disputed accounts. He looked at Mark with a professional pity. And you, sir, he indicated Mark, you will be required to account for all transfers under your name. Outside the window, a bus hissed by, indifferent. Inside, the family rearranged itself, not into peace but into accountability. There was no dramatic applause, no cinematic collapse. Instead, there was the blunt, clean clatter of process beginning, papers being gathered, numbers to be checked, confessions to be corroborated. As people left the room in a scatter of bruised faces and whispered bargains, Carla caught my eye and mouthed, "Thank you." I nodded. It felt small, like a hand wiping flour from a counter. Justice in that moment did not roar. It filled a ledger, opened a vault, and made the family answer to the work of care they had avoided. Morning came softer than it used to. The bakery's front window caught the first light like a held breath, and for once, I didn't flinch at the sound of the oven timer. The smell of yeast rose steady, clean, no longer a mask for exhaustion but a kind of prayer in motion. The court had ruled a week ago. The misused funds were to be returned, and the remainder of the estate redistributed under new trusteeship. Some of the money, modest compared to what they'd fought for, had been directed to restore what I'd quietly lost. The bakery's old roof had been patched. My debts cleared. Ben's tuition for the next 2 years, paid in full, anonymously, but I knew whose will was behind it. Diane came by that afternoon. She stood in the doorway, hesitating like a stranger. Her hair was looser, her eyes gentler. I wiped my hands on my apron before speaking. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. The words fell like crumbs, fragile and real. You did, I said, not cruelly. But we'll learn the rest of the way, she nodded, eyes shining. When she turned to leave, she placed something on the counter, a small tin that used to hold our uncle's cufflinks. Inside was a cedar shaving from his wardrobe, faintly scented with the past. He kept this in his drawer, she said. Said it reminded him of you. That night, I set it on the windowsill beside a vase of old funeral flowers I'd taken home weeks ago. Their petals had dried into delicate parchment, still faintly fragrant. Later, Carla stopped by with a jar of preserves. Payment, she said, grinning, for all the loaves you gave away. You still make them too sweet, I said, and she laughed, the kind of laughter that sounded like healing. The rest of the day was slow, unhurried. I balanced the register, wiped down the counters, and drafted a notice for a new initiative, the Elias Grant Dignity Fund, for those who work quietly and give more than they take. I'd start with a donation from the bakery's proceeds and open it for community contributions. My uncle would have liked that. No plaques, just purpose. When I closed shop, I stood in the doorway, breathing in the evening air. The sign creaked softly as it swung, open fading into closed. I ran my fingers over the cedar tin once more, feeling the faint grooves in the wood. The world outside hadn't changed much. Buses still sighed at the corner. Rain still threatened. But inside me, something had settled. The knot that had lived in my chest for years had finally loosened. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't sound like absence. It sounded like peace. The bakery was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the clock ticking above the door. Flour dust floated in the air like faint snow, catching in the yellow light. I wiped the last streak of dough from the counter and set my apron down carefully, folding it twice before laying it across the chair. On the shelf near the register sat a small photograph of my uncle, creased at the corners, his half-smile forever uncertain, and beside it, the old envelope. Its edges had softened, the crest now only a faint shimmer under the light. I slid it between the pages of my mother's recipe book, the one with stains that refused to wash out. The smell of yeast still lingered, warm and human, tangled faintly with the ghost of lemon oil from the cedar shaving on the windowsill. Outside, the streetlights blinked on one by one, their glow spreading slow and patient across the glass. I turned the lights off, leaving one candle lit on the counter, its flame bowing in the draft but refusing to die. I set the key on the counter, turned the sign to closed, and for the first time in years, felt the room answer me back.